Well, thank you so much for joining us. So after school is part of S56, and it is not something this committee knows very much about. So would love for you to essentially educate us on how this aspect of the system works, and especially how it's funded.
Absolutely. Good morning. For the record, I'm Nicole Miller. I'm the Executive Director of Vermont After School. We're a statewide nonprofit dedicated to strengthening programs, empowering youth, and expanding access to after school and summer programs so that all youth are active, engaged, connected, and heard. I'm also a member of the Interagency After School Youth Task Force, along with representatives from the Agency of Education, Department for Children and Families, the Department of Health, Department of Mental Health, the Agency of Natural Resources, Agency of Commerce and Community Development, Higher Ability, the Governor's Office, and Senator Sanders. I'm so happy to be here with you all today because Vermont After School and many others, including those I've already mentioned, and the field have been working for years now to sustainably fund after school and summer programs, including the school age child care system. And the good news is that we've already done a lot over the last few years, and we have some wonderful systems already in place at the state level. And what we're really trying to do is make sure that that is accessible for that every child in Vermont has the opportunity to attend a program. And so my intent for this morning is to provide a bit of background information for you all, both about the types of programs and the funding, and then talk a little bit about the universal after school approach and the cannabis revenue. And then I'm certainly happy to have you all interrupt me with any questions or hold questions to the end, whichever you all would prefer. So I'll start.
I think holding questions to the end is a best case scenario that we will aim towards but might fail at.
Perfect. So to provide a bit of background, after school and summer programs, when we refer to them, we're really talking about programming that happens after school, over the summer, during school breaks, before school, on the weekends, essentially anytime that children and youth are outside of home and school. There are many different program types and revenue streams that support the professionals who work to support our youth during those times. And so program types typically fall into like two categories as far as like who operates the programs. And so the first is like school run programs. Those programs, when we're talking about those, they're administered by a school, a district, or a supervisory union, meaning that the folks that are working with children and youth are employees of that LEA. And most often they're located within the school building itself, not always, but generally. Then there are community-based programs where these programs are administered, and again, employees are employees of whichever organization that are run by a community-based organization. So that could be a municipality, like a library or Parks and Rec program. It could be a nonprofit organization. It could be a licensed child care center, a Boys and Girls Club, a YMCA, a teen center. Often those programs are partnering closely with schools, not always. And they can be located in a school building or at other locations nearby.
Nicole, can you say that sentence one more time? I missed it. Thank you. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, which piece do you need me to?
You said oftentimes they're partnering, and then I lost the rest of your sentence.
Oh, yes. Oftentimes they're partnering closely with schools, not always. So community-based organizations, sometimes they're located within a school building. And they're partnering in that way. Sometimes it's shared staff, sometimes it's like real good tight communication. And then sometimes they're not quite as closely linked, but there is that open communication.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And so I thought it would be helpful to talk a little bit about the revenue streams of what's currently funding what we have in place in Vermont. Again, we have programs in a lot of places. What we don't have is programs for every youth across the state and every community at every age level. And so just quickly, when we're talking about after school and summer, we really are talking all the way up through the age of 18. So making sure that there are programs available for elementary youth, middle school youth, and high school. Obviously, those look differently based on the developmental levels and what's going to work best for those. But that is the spectrum we're trying to support. And so as far as revenue, there are some major funding sources that do support that work. One is the 21st Century Community Learning Centers. That's Title IV, Part B. It's a federal program from the U.S. Department of Education. And Vermont is really lucky. We have a robust 21C program that has been around for 20 plus years. And it's funded and managed by the Agency of Education. It serves about 100 sites, depending on the year and where programs are in their funding cycle, but about 100 sites and communities across Vermont. Then we have the Child Care Development Block Grant and CCFAP as well. So that funding, administered through the Department for Children and Families, allows states to provide financial assistance to lower income families to access childcare. So caregivers can work or attend job training or education. The funding follows the child or youth to whichever program they're attending as a way to lower the costs for their families. And so typically, when we're talking about CCFAP, it's both seen as like an option, a way for programs to count that as their revenue stream. They're receiving some of that subsidy back, but it's really around lowering the costs for children or for the families of children and youth. Then we have what I would call like the ESSER 2, the ESSER 1, the ARP-ESSER, the federal funds that have come through in the last few years because of the pandemic. And while these have been temporary funding sources, these funds have been used at both the LEA, the local level, as well as the state level as different but complementary strategies to ensure that all children and youth were able to access programs during the height of the pandemic and during those initial recovery years. The state ran some of those strategies themselves. The Interagency After School Task Force also did some work specifically for community-based organizations to support them. Those include some of the projects that Vermont After School was contracted to work with, including Summer Matters and the After School and Summer Expanding Access grants. There are also other types of federal funds that can be braided together to support programs that are providing after school and summer care. That can include title funds, Medicaid funds. There are some other federal funds specific to strategies around workforce, STEM and career exploration, full service community schools, meeting the needs of families and youth, and so much more. So some of those, usually in a little bit smaller revenue streams, are being braided together as part of like those comprehensive approaches to after school and summer and being able to support children and youth and their families and communities. There are oftentimes local funds that are being used again as part of that overall braiding that happens. Those local funds can originate from school budgets, from municipalities themselves, sometimes small fees from program participants and their families, as well as private grants and donations. What has worked in Vermont and what works across the country is really braiding those funding streams to allow after school and summer programs to develop financially strong, high quality programs with fairly compensated staff and affordable opportunities for youth and their families. Along with our early childhood partners, the pandemic has been challenging, right? Like we've seen a lot of turnover in the workforce, both due to lower wages, lack of benefits, as well as fatigue, right, and burnout. And so we've been really working hard collectively to help support the programs and the staff that are within them in these past few years as well. So just naming that as like we are seeing that same experience that is happening in many other sectors, including our early childhood partners. So I'm going to shift a little bit to looking big picture at universal after school and summer. So when we're looking big picture, we envision a universal after school landscape in which children and youth are able to, who want to participate in high quality after school and summer programs, are able to, because the programs will be universally available, accessible, and affordable. As I said, that's not the case right now. We have some great programs in some spots in the state, but not in every community. We're really committed to making sure that we support a mixed delivery model in which schools, licensed childcare programs, registered family home providers, nonprofit organizations, municipalities, teen centers, I could go on and on, who already are part of that landscape of supporting the needs of children and youth and their families, but also can continue to be part of the landscape to meet the needs of everyone within the community. After-school programs are a place where youth are able to pursue their career explorations, build protective factors, develop workforce and life skills, and to receive academic support. They're broad ranging, right? Sometimes they have more of a specific focus, but everyone is really just trying to meet the needs of children and families and youth during that time. My full written testimony, which I'll connect with Sorcia and make sure that I've shared.
You have shared it and she has now posted it. Yes.
Perfect.
Sorry about that.
So in my written testimony, there are some 6 keys to success for you all. I especially want to highlight the last one, which is around sustainable funding. We are working to develop a funding structure that includes revenue sources and grant programs so that every year we're building more access, availability, and equity for our universal after-school system. And so that includes utilizing the federal revenue streams that I've talked about earlier, such as the 21st Century Community Learning Centers, the Child Care Development Block Grant, CCFAP, and others. So that, as well as the cannabis revenue, so that we're really continuing to build that system where everyone has access to programs. So Vermont After School is supporting 2 of the administration's requests, and we agree with them, we concur with them. You know, we've been working as part of this interagency after school task force to help develop some of these systems and requests that we're hoping you all will support. So the first is around the Child Care Financial Assistance Program, as shared above. These programs are part of the after school and summer program landscape, and families are accessing CCFAP to cover the cost of programs for their children up to the age of 13. Vermont After School has been working with the Child Development Division to encourage more programs to enroll and to be able to accept CCFAP to increase the number of school-age childcare slots across Vermont so that we're taking full advantage of that funding. And so we would support the additional funds included in the administration's ask around the $7 million to expand school-age childcare through CCFAP. I know that has taken different avenues as the session has gone on, and some of those pieces are included in S56, and some of it is still in other spots, but I'll hold that for the end. Around the cannabis revenue, there's proposed language that Vermont After School supports related to that revenue and the governor's budget recommendations. And also in the Senate version of their bill, it assigns the cannabis revenue to the Agency of Education through a special fund. And creates an advisory committee comprised of the members of that interagency after school task force and outlines the grant program. We would support this language becoming more permanent, but how that happens is up to the legislature. We would just make sure, like, what we want to be able to do at the end of this session is to be able to move forward as a task force or as that advisory committee, to be able to make sure that we're getting the funds out to the field, especially as some of those ESSER funds are starting to end, later this summer, so that where we've been able to make progress, that we're not delayed. So whatever happens with the legislature, we would just ask that the language is in one place, so that it doesn't get stalled and held up at the end of the session because it hasn't been able to move forward because it's in multiple places in multiple ways. I'm going to stop there and just say, you know, that I'm really grateful for the time to speak with you all, and the financing side of things is not my area of expertise, but I'm happy to answer some questions and provide information if I'm able to.
So I guess I'm trying to better understand how sort of coverage works given the way that you described it being funded. So I know that, the 21st century grants only are going to certain districts, and that's going specifically to those districts, right?
Right. In most cases, and I'll let the agency clarify, but in most cases, the funds are awarded to a local education agency, so a district or supervisory union. There is one example of a program that is not administered by the school itself in this year's cohort.
Okay. And then there's CCFAP, which sort of goes with the family wherever.
Right.
And then
Yes.
there's the cannabis money that would go through the ed fund hypothetically. And then are you envisioning that that's grants, and how are you imagining those grants would work? I'm just trying to figure out how we get equitable coverage for this around the state when the funding stream seems so.
Yes. That has been the challenge.
Yes.
So what the task force has done at this point is we've started some initial analysis. We know that there are after school deserts, or where there's very little infrastructure or capacity. So what we did this winter was we looked at every single community, and it's easiest to look at school enrollment numbers. That's where we're pulling most of that information from. So we've looked at each individual community and the number of licensed childcare slots that are within that community, as well as whether or not there's a 21st Century Community Learning Center program. From there, we were able to determine which communities have some capacity. I will say that no community has enough. Even within our own staff here at Vermont After School, who most of them live in Chittenden County, they're struggling to find summer care and after school care all the time. So there are certainly areas of the state that have far less. And some of those have been prioritized in some of the grant competitions that we've given. But what we're intending to do is to outlay a structure where we're really looking at the communities where there's very little capacity first, and helping them develop some infrastructure. So that might involve bringing together community partners to understand what some of the challenges are, what some of the barriers are, and to help them determine, is the school a possibility to take on the capacity to run a program? Is there a licensed childcare provider or a nonprofit organization or the municipality that might be able to build some capacity with not only financial support, but also technical support around building up and starting their program?
Anyone else feel free to ask a question at any point. At my district, my understanding is that a lot of the after school capacity happens in the school buildings, but is run by an outside agency. Are there places in Vermont where the programming is actually run by the school?
Yes.
And are those funded through the school budget?
Some, right? So yes, there are both. There are communities like yours, Chair, where there are outside entities that are running the program. So there are community-based programs that are operating in close partnership with the school, in your case, sharing the school building or having access to the school building. There are school-run or school-administered programs. Sometimes those are funded by local funds. Sometimes, most often, I would say there are programs that are pulling in 21st Century Community Learning Center funds, as well as many of them are pulling in CCFAP to help start to braid those funds. And then we've had in the past, the state has administered some ARP ESSER, so that's the ESSER, the last category of ESSER funds, programs that are working to expand programs in some of the schools. Those funds are just open to school districts.
Thank you. Because I can keep it hours on this one.
Different direction. Vermont After School, is that part of the Agency of Education?
No, Vermont After School is a nonprofit organization. So we're our own 501c3. And we similar to like a combination between Building Bright Futures and VACE and Let's Grow Kids, but operating at the school age level. So we do have some state contracts and grants to help support certain parts of the field that are under those revenue streams. And then we also bring in private funds to be able to help support and provide resources to the field.
So you're a private nonprofit.
Yes.
Representative Taylor, and then.
A couple questions. First of all, what do you see as the primary roadblock to providing the kind of breadth of service that you're aiming for? Is it labor force or funding or transportation or regulations, or which of those would you attack first, or something else?
Yeah, I think it's hard to identify one broad stroke. In each community, the needs may be different. Certainly workforce has been a challenge and is something that even programs that have funding are continuing to struggle with. So workforce becomes a huge priority, but also for the communities where they don't have enough capacity, it really is around, do they have startup funds? And do they have support in order to help build out not only their programming, but also think about how they will be able to sustain that in the future? So I'm sorry, that's not a great answer to say it's all of them.
That's okay. All right. Well, one other question. Colchester has a pretty extensive Parks and Recreation program. How does municipal programs interact with you or this after school?
Yeah, so I would, and I think you're referring to like the ACE program or Colchester Parks and Recreation. Yes. Yep. So in that case, I would define them as a community-based program and specifically a municipality that is operating the program itself. Some of those around the state, and I don't know the specifics of ACE off the top of my head, do partner really closely with the school. Sometimes those programs are held within the school building itself. But Vermont After School's approach is to support any program that's operating within the after school and summer field. And then certainly they're a part of, when we look at getting to universal after school, as far as the task force, they're a part of that landscape that's already in place that we're trying to keep in place. Certainly we don't want to lose programs where we already have them. And so we want to continue to bolster them and help support them, in addition to creating more capacity around the rest of the state or considering expansion. I imagine most programs are operating with a waiting list, regardless of what funding source they're using, where they are located, whether they're in a school, whether they're run by a school, run by a community. Most programs have waiting lists at this point.
Thank you.
Representative.
Thank you. I'm following my colleague from Colchester. I'm sort of curious. We've been immersed in the ins and outs of CFAP and how eligibility to participate in that varies with income, et cetera. Are there eligibility barriers other than transport capacity, workforce, financing that you could put your finger on that we would have some kind of influence over, or is it really capacity, workforce, and finances that are holding it back? Any eligibility hurdles that we could tend to?
I think as far as this committee could attend to, those are the big three. Yes. Certainly workforce, funding, all of those pieces, yes.
But no regulatory barriers that you could identify for us?
I
don't think regulatory wise, I think the one thing I would say is you know, when we're focusing on the childcare system, just remembering it does go all the way up to the age of 13. And so where there are supports being put in place to support the early childhood, those that are working with infant, toddler, and preschool, and that funding, I mean, personally, I think that funding absolutely should be in place. I'm also encouraging you all to look at how do we also make sure that we're supporting the providers and the families for the school age portion of the childcare system. And then just a reminder that when we're looking at universal after school, we're looking at all the way up through age 18. So obviously that surpasses the childcare system, so that we're supporting middle and high school age youth as well.
Nicole, when we have been, I mean, who knows where the after school language will complete its journey through this building. I think it has a few places it's starting its journey. But when we are sort of looking at it in the context of the bill that, you know, S56 as it came from House Human Services, the CCFAP dollars are increasing for after school as well. But in the conversations that we're having, there's sort of the next step for the early care system, which is sort of, you know, meeting these long-term strategic goals that are tied to the RAND study. What is sort of the next step on the other side of this for the after school system?
Right. So should some sort of advisory committee be able to be created with the budget language around the universal after school and the cannabis revenue? The work for that group is to finalize the data, make sure that we do, you know, as I said, we did some initial data analysis over the winter in preparation for the session, but certainly making sure that our data is 100, you know, is as correct as we can get. And then starting to identify, you know, from that, identifying those communities where they have very little capacity, and really thinking of the state needs to give them some sort of grant where they're going to be able to really have the time and space to build out their program and to think about who those partners are, who are the correct entities, who are the players that need to be involved, and to hear from families in those communities. So it's kind of like starting a program from scratch. You have to do the needs assessment, but as far as the advisory committee goes, the work is to make sure that our numbers are correct and to then start working in those communities. Yes.
Thanks. I just want to say, like, really appreciate you sort of naming that it requires a significant amount of capacity to conceive something, and you know, before you can even access the money to implement it. I'm remembering during the early pandemic times, as schools were shutting down and our communities were struggling to have places that kids could go. I was like a part of some informal conversations about, well, how we stand up, and it just. You know, everyone was already tapped out, and it took so much energy to try to facilitate those conversations, to imagine what was possible, that it just sort of fizzled. And similarly, my district actually, I think, as you know, has lost program director and then site directors. And, you know, there's been an effort within the community to try to reimagine how do we pull together an after school program again. But when there are limited organizations that are already overwhelmed, it's really hard to make the space to have the conversation to even to imagine what could be done. So, and in our smallest communities struggle with that the most.
Right. I will say, and this is Vermont After School speaking, not necessarily task force. I want to be careful who I'm speaking for here, but we have seen through working with communities and entities with some of the Summer Matters and expanding access ESSER funded grants that we've been able to distribute to communities and community-based organizations, that oftentimes they're struggling with building up the infrastructure as well as the seed money, right? Most of those grants are reimbursable. And so to the degree possible within, I'm being careful of my words here, but Vermont After School would advocate for and hope that some of those funds, especially where there's very little capacity, that some of those funds are non-reimbursable, that there's a way to try and get to supporting those communities with some initial funds so that they have the time and capacity to do that initial planning that's supported financially as well as with technical assistance and resources, not just saying, well, here's the money, go run a program and start a program from scratch.
Nicole, Carl Demro here from Corinth, and I've had some conversations with members of your staff about this exact thing that we're talking about right now, and really appreciated the way that you and your staff have been sort of bent over backwards to try and help with some of that capacity stuff, and been really encouraging and very supportive, and that means a lot for, I think, for communities that are trying their best to pull off programs, but really, really struggling with that capacity piece. Really appreciate your work with that. Thank you.
You're welcome. It's this past few years has really been a joy for us to get to work really closely with new programs and to be able to provide some of those supports and see the additional resources and services that are then being able to be provided for Vermont's children and youth and families and communities, right? When we support young people and their families, then our communities can thrive. And so that's why we're doing the work.
Nicole, do you have any opinion on a special fund or non-special fund, education fund, general fund? Everyone has opinions, so I thought I'm not making no promises that we will do your preference, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it.
Yes, certainly Vermont After School's interest is to, and I am not the expert about what a special fund can and can't do, what it means. Like, I just want to be clear around that. Our interest is making sure that the funds are able to be subgranted out to communities or entities. So making sure that's there, and also to help hold the state, the collective state, accountable for working towards universal after school and summer, and making sure that those funds are being used in that purpose of working towards creating that system and building that capacity. That would be our interest as Vermont After School.
And then how do food programs work at after school and summer programs?
Right. So in many cases, programs are able to access, I'm going to get my acronym right, the CACFP, not CCFAP, the food service programs. Many times those are run by school districts. Most programs are providing some sort of snack or meal, right? So, but oftentimes it's coming at a cost for them if they're not reaching those eligibility percentages that allow them to be able to get those to get full reimbursement amounts for each of those meals. So I know in the program that I used to run in actually Representative Sims area, we at our Hardwick site, we had a family home provider that was able to access the free summer meal option that was put on by the school, as well as our kids that were in our summer program. That worked out really well. That's not always the case in every community because of the percentages and who's eligible, who's not eligible. But certainly after school and summer programs are trying to make sure that food is a part of the services that we're providing to children and youth, whether it's through after school snacks or summer meals. And so, you know, we definitely support and encourage the legislature to consider how to best utilize the federal resources that are coming down and maximize the ability for all children and youth to be able to access free meals.
Thanks. And do after school programs run backpack take home food programs?
There may be some, I haven't heard, I don't have any data to support that.
Okay.
There may be some that are doing that. I just don't know that I've heard specifically.
Thanks. I would love to know that at some point in the next 6 months. I definitely don't need to know it before the end of the session if you like. Next time you have a big group meeting or send out a survey or something.
Absolutely.
And then how people are funding that would be the second question.
Yes, I know that there were some in the early days of the pandemic, you know, that first 6 months, 8 months, when everything was closed down, there were some efforts to help make sure that kids and families were supported during that time with meals being delivered. But obviously that looks really different now that things are more open. But I'll look into that and see what data I can find for you.
Thank you very much.
Could you explain to me what the program was that you were asking?
Some schools and some early care and education centers operate like backpack take-home programs so that you like bring ingredients for dinner home. It's often just like on Fridays, so you're bringing food home for the weekend.
Got it.
Or sometime, the food bank operates something at school somewhere where sort of parents are doing pickup. There's just a way of integrating sort of outside of school time food provision into a place where people are. And so I was curious, if after like hauling it home from school to an after school program seems challenging for, your average parent with a backpack. I was curious if after school programs do that as well.
Particularly important, I would assume, on Friday afternoon, sort of, because that's the food insecurity interval, if you will.
Yeah.
I would imagine that if a school is providing that service, regardless of whether a program is run by the school or whether it's run by a community-based organization at the school or elsewhere, that they're certainly trying to help support that. But I don't know if they're specifically running their own backpack program or not.
Okay, thank you. I'm really looking forward to like the next phase of this as we can you can help us see a vision for what comprehensive after school programming would be around the state. And I'm really grateful for the work you've sort of done to get us to this point. We have so many systems in the state that are cobbled together with like duct tape and baling twine to make, to meet the needs of Vermont families. And I'm glad that Vermont After School exists to try to move us past duct tape and baling twine.
Well, thank you. I do want to say, this effort is supported by, we're super grateful, and we have shown that different agencies through the state can work together on a combined effort, and that we've been able to do that through the administration of some of these grant programs in the last few years. And so, we're grateful to have this broad support, both from the legislature as well as the administration, to help us think through this, right? Like, each community has their own unique mix of resources and opportunities and strengths, and it really does provide us the opportunity and the responsibility to make sure that we're taking a broad view and also thinking holistically about what children and youth need during those after school and summer hours. Whether that is care, whether it's high quality enrichment programs, whether it's food security, meeting the needs of children and youth around social emotional learning and mental health. I could go on and on, career aspirations, many other things that programs are trying to do and support. And so we're really grateful for your support in our work towards that effort too.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Anyone have any final?
Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Have a good day.
True.
Impressive. So the deputy commissioner from CDD is going to join us at 11:15. And for the next 3 minutes, we're rest. So we can go offline or not, up to you.